I wanted to ask my first question to you to say, put yourself in my shoes, or our shoes in business. And although I never let media ask a two-point question, I have a two-sided question here. On one hand, you talked about a really bright future. And so I'd like you to take one more level down and talk about the opportunity. We always talk about the downside. So talk about the opportunity. I'm one of your largest employers, as are many in the room, about what would even be better. We always viewed it was good to do business in Britain. So what would make it, in your view, how our businesses will improve? My other side of my coin is that all of us are in the business of enterprise risk management. And so as we talk about Brexit and obviously your checkers plan, and there between a lot of continuums between there and a hard Brexit, if you were us, and I know all my banking friends, every regulator does its job and says plan for the worst, right, as all regulators do. So what would you tell us, and what would you do in our shoes to be planning right now? So the future ahead, and then what would you do now to balance that risk?
Well, perhaps if I could take them in the reverse order.
Okay.
And start off with the sort of planning now. Because obviously we're at the point in the negotiations where we've got a few weeks to go. The deadline that was set was always this autumn of this year. And of course, we leave on the 29th of March next year. So, and we don't know where the negotiations will end. I'm confident that we will get a deal. And interestingly, there are more voices around Europe, other European leaders now saying that, talking about getting a deal. But we have to make sure that we're prepared for any eventuality. And of course, as government, we're preparing for a deal and we're preparing for no deal. And my job as government, I think, is to ensure that we have that we've put in place the steps that make sure that if it is that worst case scenario, actually we will still make a success of it. Because I want to make a success of Brexit, whatever the deal. I believe we will get a good deal, but we're taking that contingency planning. But there is, I think, a really bright future there, and it's a number of things that come together. And I think the UK is, in a sense, uniquely placed because some of the advantages that we have, I mentioned some of them in my speech. I think that we have some of the great scientists, innovators, creative minds in the UK. I think we have a sort of ecosystem in the UK that supports business. In all aspects, so the financial ecosystem, but also other professional services and others. And we have some of the best universities in the world. And I think working with a government that is interested in ensuring we develop the economy of the future, working with us, bringing together those advantages, I think means that we can really drive forward. And I want the UK to be, as I just said, one of the best places to actually be able to set up and grow a business, and for existing businesses to grow even further, and to work with us as we develop our response to these grand challenges for the future. We want to be a leader in these key issues that are facing the world.
When you mentioned, you spoke a lot about technology and what the future looked like. And as you prepare one way or the other, I know as I think of running a business, and every company today is a technology business, and I think of every country I'm in, what do I need for innovation? And I know three things I'd reinforce, no matter what direction, that I think are important to business. One is going to be the free movement of skills. And you referenced that in your particularly high-valued skills across the country, across the continent, is one. The other thing I know it's going to be imperative is so much of the discussion about trade is about hard goods, physical things, but you referenced this, so much is about digital now. And so they really do need to modernize trade agreements for the digital world. I think actually the agreement with Mexico has some very strong digital trade provisions, something to look at. And that's an important piece, I think, to business, because if that isn't there, this idea that you would have free flow of not just people, data. Because all of us, I think many people don't realize, you wake up in the morning, you check the weather. Data had to move across boundaries for that to happen. The next thing you do, you're checking, you go to a bank, you take money out. Data moved around. And so it is, everything in your daily life requires on that. I think so it's very personal to people. It sounds like a threatening trade issue until you go through everything you do in your life that you just realize for that to happen meant data had to cross a border. So the free flow move of data, I think, is one of the things that is just so important as you now, no matter what the outcome, that and the free movement of skills?
Well, I think on the skills side, there's two things I would say. Yes, of course, when we leave the EU, free movement from the EU will end, but we'll set new immigration rules. But in doing that, we're respecting the vote that took place. That issue of free movement was a key issue in the referendum vote. But also do it in a way that recognises the needs of the British economy. And I think that's important for the future. But there's another element of skills too, which is about skilling our own people. Making sure that young people coming through education today in the UK are being equipped for the skills of the future. That's why we're developing our new technical education qualifications, a real emphasis on making sure that every young person can develop their talents, whether that involves going to university, doing an apprenticeship, a technical qualification, making sure we've got those skills. And also, we're starting to introduce retraining for people who are in the workplace already. Because what a lot of people worry about when people talk about AI and such forth is, oh, that means some robot's going to do my job's going to disappear. Actually, there will be jobs, but there'll be different jobs.
Yes.
Retraining people for those jobs is an important element.
Yes.
And then the question of data and so forth, it is right. When people look at trade, they still often tend to look at goods. But actually, we need to be ensuring that we're freeing up the global system in global services, in investment, in procurement, so that all of those issues, which are so important for business and for governments, for economies, are actually part of that free trade movement as well.
Yes, well, you and I have had the chance to talk about skills and about trust and technology many times before, but I want to kind of put two things together you just said. You talked about partnership a lot. I believe this skill issue is one that's the responsibility of business and government together. Neither can solve it alone. And your comment about is trade good or bad? That's a discussion everywhere in the world. And a lot of that roots in whether people think they're going to lose their job because of free trade. On the other side, technology you just referenced. All the fear about, well, does this just displace me and there's no better future? And all that comes back to, I always say to people, it's not really relevant what percentage of jobs will be really eliminated. 100% are going to change. So we've got to make it inclusive so everyone, you mentioned apprenticeships, can participate in this. And that will only be tackled in the time frame that's going to be needed if government and business work together. And so I'm really happy to hear you describe, I think, this continuum. We can help be sure that everyone doesn't have a university degree, and we're working on programs. You and I were talking about, we called it new collar, not a blue collar workforce, not a white collar, a way to participate fully in the economy without having a university degree. But then you mentioned reskilling and apprenticeships, which I think is the more difficult piece that's got to be addressed right now to make this an inclusive. And so I'm really pleased, Prime Minister, that you recognize and put that at the top of your agenda, because it is part of what I know you do every day is to convince the country free trade is good. So maybe a comment about, and I think part of that is that skills agenda to convince people this is a good thing.
I think that's right. It's one of the challenges that we and other governments around the world face today is that I think for some people they feel they've in a sense been left behind.
Yes.
Globalization, free trade, these are things that benefit other people and not them. Making sure actually that people benefit, which they do from free trade, but recognise what it brings, that it brings prosperity, it brings jobs, it brings those opportunities for people for the future. Now that's partly about government, but it is about working with business. It's about working with business to ensure that we're skilling. Obviously we talked about what IBM particularly has been doing in relation to skills. Others also are looking at how they can work to help young people particularly get the skills for the future. But it's also about government setting the right environment in which business can thrive. That's about issues like tax and regulation, but it's about working with business as we are in our industrial strategy and our £1 billion industrial strategy challenge fund with our sector deals, such as our AI sector deal, are about working with business and saying, how can we ensure we're creating the right environment that then enables business to do what it does, which is grow, create jobs, provide prosperity.
Yes, so the world you describe, and I wholeheartedly believe in, is one about inclusive skills for everyone to participate. But you also mentioned, really, we're ushering in a whole new era of technologies, and people have to trust them. this has been a topic near and dear. We met at Davos on this, that it's what was behind you setting up the Center for Ethics that we too have participated with you on. I think everyone would be interested in why this became such at the top of your agenda and your views on that first, and I'll add my own, because I think this is actually the paramount issue, that if people do not trust these new technologies, they will not flourish, by the way, and it will create an even greater have and have-not society. So if you would.
Yes, well, I think this is absolutely right. The economy of the future, I mean, technology is here already, but developing rapidly, and the economy of the future depends on people having access to technology, being able to having skills to use technology, being able to take on those jobs, but in their day-to-day life, trusting that technology. And that's why we set up the Centre for Ethics and Data and Innovation. And this is putting these together to make sure that as we see new innovations, as we see developments taking place, we're able to set that ethical framework so people have the confidence of knowing that they don't have to worry about how their data is going to be used. I think we can help people in another way as well, because I think if people see some of this new technology being used to real advantage in their day-to-day lives in ways that perhaps they hadn't thought of, this is also important. If I can give one example, one of our challenges on AI is about how it can actually be used to help to get much earlier diagnosis of some key diseases and health problems that people have. Some really interesting work being done with DeepMinds and Moorfield Hospital on actually using AI to be able to much earlier diagnosis of eye problems, for example, and eye diseases. That can be of real benefit to people. And then if we can show people that this isn't some worrying thing, some scary thing out there that's just going to take your job away, actually it's going to change your life for the better. And, by the way, provide new higher paid, higher skilled jobs that you and your children can take on, then I think we will have, we'll be able to persuade people of the benefits.
I do think it's two sides that have to be addressed. You use the word framework first. I happen to believe, actually all of us should self-regulate ourselves, if at all possible. And when it comes to people trusting technology, privacy, that was one of the things that this center addresses. I think these are paramount issues, trust and transparency, that people believe, as you just said, you live by a set of principles. And in fact, actually, I think the world, it will separate between companies that embrace good tech principles and bad tech principles. Good tech principles will be countries that say to this technology, hey, the purpose is to make your and my life better, augment what we do. And I know I speak for somebody who builds some of this, that I have control over that. The other thing is, when it comes to data privacy, to honor that, and that the owner of the data gets the value, right? And then, to your comment a second ago, and we too do a lot of work on healthcare, that these technologies be explainable. So in other words, not a black box that says, here's what your illness is. You have to say, why is this the case? Or people won't trust it. And my biggest fear is fairness and bias, because so much of this world of data is trained on history. Well, history's got some bad things in it. And so you've got to be able to check that you're not training bias into everything we do. So I like your word, a framework on how to go about this. And then there is the practical applications that people have to experience every day. And that would help unleash. So I think your work to advance this is really, really critical to drive this, what you view as a whole innovation umbrella for the country. And so you named 4 technologies. And you have great universities there as well. And so I think the issue is going to be now getting these, and I think this is, again, where business can be in partnership with you. So what would you ask of us on how to be stronger partners? Because I think many of us would say what we listen to is intelligent regulation, check. Free trade, check. Modernization of trade, check. Right skills, check. Skills, check. I mean, we would go through that list. What are the areas we can help the most in? I know skills is at the top, but what else can we help in?
Well, I think it's across all of those areas, really. And the first thing is for business and government to recognise the importance of that partnership. I think sometimes in the past it's been much more sort of a separation in terms of business
Yes.
and government. Actually recognising that there are roles, that the role that government can play, but also that it's by working together, by exchanging information and understanding, that we can really get to the right answers. And that's where things like our sector deals are doing exactly that, bringing business and government together. So partly it's there's certainly on the skills agenda. It's about, and business can help by working with government on what are actually the skills of the future.
Yes.
You know, if you're looking, if a government is looking in our education system, we need to know not just what the skills are needed today, but what they will be needed in the future, such that we can ensure that is going through the system and young people are being trained up for that.
Yes.
And just also working together to promote the message about free trade and open markets, open economies is so important, so that people see that this is something that is genuine benefit across the world. And we focus naturally on our own countries and the benefit it brings there. But think of the huge benefits that are being brought and can be brought elsewhere in the world. I was in Africa recently, and fascinating, seeing a real enthusiasm. 18 million jobs needing to be created every year between now and I think it's 2035.
Yes.
It's business that's going to create those.
Yes. Well,
that's important. It's business that will create those jobs.
I speak for everyone. I always think, often in a country, someone says, I love jobs. I'm like, you do realize we're the job creators, right? And so I'm going to end with one question from the audience, which I talked to Steve earlier today, and I thought he and I were speaking about really the importance of such a positive environment here. And so, Steve, I'm going to throw to you for the Prime Minister a question here as we wrap up.
I don't know why I got this privilege.
Just
in terms of downside management, which is what Ginni was talking about, we actually just bought a big thing in the UK last week, so I guess we're believers. But on the other side, things could really go off with a bad Brexit. And ultimately sort of a change of government. And the things that we really worry about is how bad could things get? I know how good they can get. The good thing, we believe in the good thing, but just in terms of thinking through that from a risk management perspective, it's a little daunting for those of us on the outside. We're not in your system. We just observe. How do you think about that?
Well, I absolutely appreciate and understand the point you're making about as people are making decisions and looking ahead to what the future holds. And at the moment, there is that uncertainty about what the future will hold in terms of Brexit. I think the way I look at it in government is, first of all, just if I can say this again, I believe that we will and can get a deal and a good deal. And that's because it's not actually just about the UK, it's about what's good for the EU as well. And I think that continued trading relationship is going to be a good for both sides. But there are several weeks of intense work to be done in order to get to that point. But from the government's point of view in the UK, we continue to have the same ambitions about the future of our economy. And that's why, in a sense, if you look at what we're doing on the industrial strategy, I think it would have been right to do it anyway, but Brexit brings a sharper focus to it. Because it has, in a sense, we are doing that job of actually saying what, regardless of what our relationship with the EU is going to be in the future, what is it about our economy that we want to put in place to ensure that people will want to come and invest and will want to create those jobs? And that's why we've been looking at this, this concept of the economy of the future, skilling our young people to make sure that we're having those building blocks in place. That means post-Brexit, whatever that relationship is with the EU, we will be able to ensure that we are still a great country to come and do business, to come and grow a business and create jobs and prosperity. So we're doing our planning for that.
Well, Prime Minister, I want to end. You actually said something I think is really critical to end on a very, I think, optimistic note, in that what you just described, and I think it's a wonderful point about crises, they do sharpen everything about what you do. And so what I heard you describe up there was an extremely positive, forward-looking message to business. And now that you have defined what are very differentiating characteristics, and that I think most of us in this room want to see those all come to pass, not only for our past investments, our future investments. And so, as someone once said to me, everything in politics is impossible till it's not. And so I think that's that you defined it.
Some of the key elements of the UK that make it a great place to invest in and do business aren't going to change post-Brexit. We're still going to have those great scientists, those innovators, that great ecosystem of professional services and financial services. We're still going to have some of the best universities in the world, a great legal system. But some of the positives that bring people to invest in the UK will still be there, regardless of the Brexit.